thing working here. I'm Clay Douglas. I am the Free American. My guest today is William Blair and Art George with Introspect. Welcome, gentlemen. William.
Good morning. Good morning, Blair.
Good morning. Good morning, guys. Good morning, Art. I got you.
Good morning, Clay.
Something came across my desk today as I was getting everything set up for the show, and got to tell you, kind of brought tears to my eyes, and I wanted to share that with you, if you don't mind, because I think it's relevant here. And I think we're headed into, well, certainly want to get your opinion on it. We're headed into a second Civil War, and this particular tune was written during the last Civil War.
Here's a song that was reportedly sung by both sides in the Civil War, which proves one thing to me, that a song can belong to all of us. You don't have to be a rich man to have a beautiful thing like music. I could close my eyes and hear the song and picture a group of beaten, wounded, ragged Civil War soldiers trying to make that last mile home after the last battle. And if there was strength for a song, this would have been a great inspiration. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are scored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Another thing that brings tears to my eyes is the fact that all of the people I like, all of these singers I like, all of the songs that I like have passed on. And I'm still here. William Blair, you've got, you formed Introspect, and I put up a little bit of what your purpose was there. It's tell me about it. You're my guest here. Tell me about Introspect. What are you trying to accomplish? What do? You refer to yourself and Art as auditors for Introspect.
That's correct, Clay. The Introspect was formed because the institutions had moved way beyond the laws of learning and actually were more focused in orientation, thought reform, mind control, conversational hypnosis, certainly through the media, predictive programming, and basically values and brainwashing. So we had to step out of that several decades ago. Art and I came together in Nevada, and obviously as we've evolved, not only Art is the master auditor for Indigenous Affairs that covers Oregon and Nevada, and I'm the auditor directorate of Introspect. Now we have 6 deep field auditors, and these auditors go out and probe and examine directly various events in Indian country. Indian country has become important because the institutions, through a collaborative process, have moved in and handle the decision makers in Indian country. It's very franchised. So basically, we've had to go and look at this. Art, did you want to pick up from here before we get too far into this?
Yeah. Yes, I do, William. I'd like to say a prayer here, Clay, before we begin here.
Go ahead. Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Clay. Igoi tatikitiki daleo gasu kakamangao. So gay ha baba amma. Ihamo angawe keshe. Gasu kakamangao. Hung loyalty. Tongue loyalty. One loyalty. Baba lu. Ida ngawa. Puti we me mile tatesh. Gasu kakamangao. Mileo. Di mulo she. Di suya she. Okay, go ahead, William.
So as we approached Indian country, we realized that pretty much that there was an interdiction strategy, and the same strategy applies in the general domain globally to locally. Now, the auditors use direct observations. They acquire evidence, exhibits, testimonies, and there'll be an auditor joining us later that'll go to this. What is important is we're going on the record. What we say is on the record. What we say we can prove. And we are very particular and very precise on who and what is the problem. Our focus is on the systems integration. Human values, people will determine their own values. Unfortunately, we are dealing with the same pattern, and that the pattern of the non-culture. So we had traditional values, we had indigenous people, and now we have institutionalized people, and their identity has been taken, not because somebody stole their credit card, but because their so-called leaders, which are actually collaborative decision makers, apply collusive and conclusive presumptions, and these presumptions do not come from indigenous country. This is evidentiary in the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights collectively. Unfortunately, in Indian country, the treaty covenants have been misconstrued as civil rights under a left-wing, predominantly civil rights movement, at least in its face, which is really a corporate movement. The evidence is in the brief at 410 pages is still an open case file. The interdiction strategies have been published in the brief, the attachments. Today we're going back and applying what we call a consistency determination. Each of us, Art and I, will give our perspectives on that, but there's no question in our mind that in this country that the government is not being seen as what it really is. Now we can go into the republic, the constitutional republic, the Iroquois Confederated Tribes, and things that evolve from there. But nevertheless, today, now, collaborative governance is your government system. Collaborative governance was put in place basically to get rid of the public at all effective levels of government. This meant that the public was basically set aside as incompetent and certainly not effective for the common purposes. In behind this, the usual players, stakeholders, and so forth appear. Want to pick this up, Art?
Yeah. I think what's kind of important for really the listeners, for people to really understand, is when the people first came to this country back in 1540, the Indian nations had given them a place to stay and made fire for them and built them a house, built them a lodge. And then after they got well and they brought more folks over here, they turned around and told the Indian people they had to leave. That was the first instance of where this deception of what these people had come here to do came to effect. And then along down the road, the U.S. Claims all the commerce of this country under conquest. And then down the road, the USA governing system makes an effort to pay for lands taken for 2 cents to 5 cents an acre, claiming they were paying for it when the time was taken, and that's all it was worth. And that being called the largest real estate deal in the world. Then, after that, the offering the tribes a form of governing system designed by USA called the IRA system to do business and to be recognized. Then later on, by disguise, telling the Indian nations that the USA is paying Indian money back for money owed, even grazing fees that were held from us by their own USA accountability, and calling it the Cobell settlement. When beneath the veil, the Indians accepting this payment were selling the commerce of oil, gas, water, minerals, etc., and USA calling this a last legal plunder of the Indians' assets, and saying that the surface of the land was stolen. Now the tribes need to sign off for the rest beneath the soil. And now today, the next and last stage of this vast design of activity is the taking of our natural connection to earth and being a slave to the corporation, slave to man, and this next move is called the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights by United Nations. Now, what William's talking about, us original people, is we've always trusted in the words or the activities that's been going on in our country from the very beginning. And along the way, we've constantly been lied to, been deceived, and there always has been an agenda that we've been able to trail, been able to find that path. And what's really interesting is all of this history that I've just briefly told you about is written in stone in the sense by the history of this country. But none of this is told to the American people. There's nothing that is told to this country, to the world. And I was listening to the presidential campaigns with all these people that are running for president, and everybody's staying away from the original people's position or where it is we are in the whole design. They're going on talking about not wanting certain kind of immigrants to come to this country, when the whole time most of the people in this country that aren't original from here are immigrants, but they don't talk about it that way. And the whole time they're doing this presidential campaign, they're talking about all of this commerce that they have, that how powerful this United States is with all of its resources and all of its oil and gas and minerals, when the whole time is all of this commerce is still being stolen from the original people, and it's constantly being hidden that they're making deals through a collaborative governance approach and a step-by-step deception, fraudulent conversion campaigns. And the lawyers and the judges of this country are the ones behind it all. And this is why William and I have come together to educate people, to help them to understand the place in this history where we're at, and how to understand the mechanisms that we can put into place for ourselves so that our society can begin to evolve and grow. And it's up to the people of this country to want that, and not to sit back and say, well, I don't get involved. Oh, well, everything's fine with what I'm doing and where I'm at. But then we run across people that say that, and then after something dawns on them, or some kind of factor comes into play where they are treated the same way the original people were treated, well, with lies and deception, then they turn around and say, hey, we need to find out what you guys are doing, and we need to know what it is that you know, because this is what's happening to me. This is what they're doing to me. And so it's really important for people in this country to realize that what William and I have done, and William have done this over 40 years of his work, and I'm glad that we had come together when we did, because all of the things that have happened to me and my people in my country here, Lake Tahoe area, is the same thing. There's a real darkness to this movement, and it's pretty much just making all of us slaves in our own land. And there's only a very few people out there that have so much money they don't know what to do with it all. And if some of this money was put into education and provided to those of us like William and I to educate people, we all wouldn't be in the situation that we're in, because we can actually stand up for ourselves. Nowadays, when we provide this information to tribal leaders or tribal people, they get a kind of a light in their head, and they say, hey, hold on, can we do something about this? Can this actually work? But then the attorneys of our country, or the attorneys that are actually working for us, my tribe, have told my people, you can't go back. You've already made deals, and you've already signed these contracts, and you've already agreed to this, and you can't go back. And so this is where our problem lies, is our people have to have courage to stand up to those that have led us astray. And this identity theft document that we've created here gives us a foundation of that education that's going to help us all indigenous people throughout the world, find out the standings for where we can stand, and our foundation for our ability to take care of ourselves and bring back the family structure and the morals and the principles that the original people had in this land. And I think that's really important.
Well, let me ask you. Let me interrupt you here and ask you something. We've talked about this before, and I got to tell you, I consider myself an indigenous Texan. I was born here. My family was born here, and I'm kind of a proponent here. I don't believe I believe we are to still be a republic here in Texas. But I do consider myself an indigenous Texan, and by a process that I'm not overly proud of, we became American too. We were absorbed into the American. I believe we should have stayed on as a republic. But that's just my personal opinion. I don't like having to go to another state to see what a mountain looks like. How about that, William?
The issue, I'll follow it very briefly. One, there's real flesh and blood man and woman. These are people. They're not surrogate artificial creations as Indian affirmative action, protected group status, and so forth. In stealing the identity, the collaborative governance movement, and it is a movement. It is a very deeply embedded movement globally. All of your woes in the world come from a collaborative consensus reality. In other words, while the left blames the right for being believing in something or having faith in something, they apply the precautionary principle, which means basically no data decision making. And in it, the actual method is called the Delphi cult technique. Now, in that, the organizations that formed as little groups, activism groups in local communities promising empowerment, have mutated in the last decades from nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, to so-called private government organizations. These organizations are corporates, and they come from the corporate Bible kind of organizational ideas. The values are neutral, and the standards are market-driven. It is authoritarian. The sustainability movement, the first principle of sustainability is that science is not democratic. Now, when you go into institutional change agentry, you'll find, as we have, I have manuals in front of me that are institutional textbooks, and teaching people how to become deciders. Very authoritarian. Very, you can advance it to the lawyers. I attended the Public Information Environmental Law Conference this last year, University of Oregon, and in it I went to the lawyer panels, and it was very clear the lawyers were aggressive, extremists, very, very global oriented. In other words, collapse everything, all the wrongdoing to the global higher cause. And they made it very clear. They want to get rid of the barriers of government, meaning the branches of government. And they want to go back, basically they were advocating a royal court system. The tyrannies, the atrocities, and everything we see, whether it's local or global, are coming out of this kind of a mechanism. And that basically means that the media has to become the narrator, because the people, if they were to become intelligible, would not go along with these atrocities. So the media uses a conversational hypnosis. Now, the attachment dealing with education on the identity brief is very comprehensive. Not only do we identify the types of education, whether it's religious, military, public institutions, so forth, we go into a continuity of interest, which is part of the things we look to in providing remedies and a better course of direction. The intelligence agencies full well know what I'm talking about. They have people specialize in basically what's it started as propaganda, but the language now has evolved, and even the syntax, and you'll see this on radio stations like Public Radio International, National Public Radio, NPR, all of these different British-led institutions. Not only is it a British accent, but when you'll hear the women speak with a little goose at the end of the narration. They'll go, how are you feeling today? And these are not things that are just happening because it's a fad. This is a very sophisticated way of changing the dialogue and the meaning behind it. The word partnership isn't what it appears to be. Stakeholders are owners, and on and so forth. Now, Art covered it, what he said earlier, very clearly, very comprehensive, and in behind this is a vast amount of substantiation. The interdiction table that's in the brief is very comprehensive, and it shows the elements of academic colonialism. It shows legislative offenses, corporate state, a austerity program, capstone. Now, the other thing that Art mentioned, very important, was about fraudulent conversion. In Indian country, you're dealing with an IRA system of corporate government. The collaborating attorneys are agents, of the state. Incorporated tribes are subdivisions of the master corporation. And they will do what they're ordered to do. And what has happened is that they will do wrong. Now, the austerity programming is demonstrated in the failed Indian reservation state. Their economy is predatory. The people struggle and are under duress and coercion to do a bunch of things to get their perk, to get their benefit, and they call it the buy-in. Now, what the corporate Indian governments are doing is they proposed a buyout or buyback program. They tell their enrolled members that there's no resistance. You will do this. We'll take your land anyway. This is the theme that's going on by the collaborating corporate attorneys that are paid by the corporate tribe, and they're operating outside the judicial branch. That means that the court becomes a royal court. Lawyers bounce back and forth in and outside the judiciary. To us, that sets off misprisons of perjury, sedition, and treason. Now, lawyers don't want to talk about this. The Bar Association controls the courts. To get admitted to practice, you have to be there. Then in comes planned participation. Plan meaning nobody gets to have anything on the record, and what they've done is eliminated any traditional speakers, such as you'll hear about later. They've eliminated them. So you only get bar lawyers talking to these issues.
And let me also point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of almost probably 90% of our legislators are lawyers.
More importantly, they are bar lawyers.
Yes.
Now, in the fraudulent conversion, the buyout, here's the situation in Indian country, and we've filmed this and documented it and on and on and on, interviewed many people on the record. And what we see is double wides and single wide trailers all over, just laced throughout Indian country everywhere, in less than livable space. Then we have HUD housing clusters put in on purpose. And these are substandard to any, no rich person would ever live in a HUD housing district. Now, the trailers and everything, a lot of them are just substandard. They're falling apart. They have low values. That's it, low book values. And the tribal governments are moving into as if there's some sort of what we used to call it the Boana concept, or the Jesus concept. We're going to come in and save you. So they're going to buy them out. They're going to buy them out for market value, which is very little, according to an alien market system. Then they're going to turn it around, and they're going to lease it out and sell it out to the highest bidders. That means that these trailer homes and these people are going to be moved out. They're going to be alienated, and in that, they're going to give up all their rights. They're going to give up everything, and they're going to have no right to recourse. And then in comes the speculators, the banksters, and so forth that are in the predatory economy, and they will make a fortune. Now, this spins off worse. They buy it and pretend that it's going to become ecosystem services. And in comes the derivative speculators who are dealing in environmental things like cap and trade, offsets, carbon credits, carbon banking, even to the extent that they'll offer Indian women carbon tax exemptions if they'll sterilize themselves or have abortions, while Indian women can sell their babies on the global market.
William?
Yeah.
Clay?
Yes.
I think what's really important also to include in that is when the state or any state of this country became a state, the federal government assured them that the Indian title was extinguished. And what that means is that the traditional people that still believe that this country is under their care doesn't exist anymore. So whenever this country or the legal position of this country deals with us Indian people. They continue to deal with us like we have some kind of sovereignty, but they call it emotional sovereignty. They understand our situation. They understand what happened, you know, but legally, the traditional people have no say, and anything we say and do is fruitless, because they're only making us feel good, because the only people they listen to are the tribal corporations now that have bought into the welfare system of this country.
And that's happening
so,
also, isn't it? With the isn't that happening with these casinos too? These casinos aren't really owned by the Indians, are they?
Well, the casinos are, you know, the casinos are notorious, and a good example is the employment. We call it the wealth separation index. You have the inner circle, the tribal inner circle. These are the collaborators and their surrogates. And then you have the traditional people now representing the far underclass. Now, that didn't happen by mistake or market-driven standard. That happened by sequestration, which is the taking and consolidation of the original alloidial ownership and property of individual Indians. Now, the lawyers know damn well that that's unlawful to do these takings, but when they're dealing with people then been subjected to a hardwired tyranny, we call it the boss man syndrome. In other words, you end up with a royal court that is directed by the inner circle, the collaborators. It's very important to understand that the hinge pan of collaboration are the attorneys and judges.
Well, the same thing. We're putting up with the same thing.
What they are not authorized to negotiate.
We're putting up with the same thing with the you know, states or the individual people, you know, the white people, the Europeans, or whatever, the original formers, descendants of the formers of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. We're going to do the same thing. We're basically being enslaved by these bankers and these lawyers. And William, I've got somebody that added in, they didn't hit one from the 775 and ending in 7119. Is that somebody, is that an auditor that you want to bring up?
I think so. And then what happens is that...
What's that?
I think it is. Yeah, it is, Renee.
Renee, okay.
Okay.
I will
the
bring...
bar lawyers...
All right, I brought Renee up. Hello, Renee, just a second, and we'll get to you. William's talking right now. Go ahead, William.
Okay, the tribes basically are artificial entities, and they're really trying to get them into as close as they can as ambiguous municipalities. This has gone on for 40 years, and what they have convinced the tribal corporate councils to do, which are either councils or business committees, was to adopt the uniform commercial codes. And this means that you're going to go by the alien system. So you end up in an alien system, which on reservations we've technically described it as a predatory economy. This means payday loans, toxicity, absolutely manifested on purpose. In other words, you have food deserts, you have fast food reservations, you have a sugar delivery toxin system. So we call it nutrient deserts as well. This is coming from the UN level, and Codex is recognized by WHO and the UN, and they go in and they make sure that the standards meet the corporate market-driven standards, and that's what they do. And evidence is in what they call the events log on sickness and so forth. The CPS services, the Atlanta CDC, they know about these things, but they're simply being hushed up because as Art said, they're pushing for the final termination and transition of authorities and services to the states, which is called, coined by the lawyers, as domestic dependent nations. Now, that's why we have advocacy being silenced, ignored. In one particular case, we have 4 lawyers that are going to end up being sued in Montana, South Dakota. There'll be lawyers sued in Nevada. They're going to be sued along with the judges for misconduct and criminal misconduct. There'll be charges. And the reason is that they're way outside the loop, and as they collaborate, they have to deceive people and confuse their rights and titles. So echelon appointments are appearing all the time. In other words, we have a boss man in the background, usually a lawyer, telling the tribal councils what they can do and can't do.
Well, you're introspect. You're standing up for the indigenous Americans here, what we know of as Indians. Who's standing up for people like me? Who's standing up? I mean, I feel like I've been targeted. I've had my companies closed. And I don't have any recourse on this. I've had people killed, put in jail.
Go ahead, Art.
Well,
Go ahead.
Clay, I was going to say this to you earlier when you asked about being a Texan and all that. The reason I brought up the thing about the states were ensured that the Indian title was extinguished, that when they became a state, was because there's 2 parts coming on here. One is the original people, their voice, and the other is the people of this country's voice. Now there's 2 voices going along, and the people of this country, after the states became a state and they believed the Indian title was extinguished, I tried to speak at a conference one time, and a guy spoke up and he tells me, get over it. You know, like my voice didn't mean anything, and that the state and the position that the people are in this country, their voice was over mine, when all I was trying to do was be included. Now that's the fight that goes on in this country, is they've paired us against each other to where we don't understand what had happened in this country to make us divided. The only thing that divides us is our knowledge of what position we're in. And this identity theft document and this educational position William and I are taking can help you also, but it can also help other indigenous people throughout the world understand the position you're in and how these conversions are taking place, but what mechanisms they're using on us, because we're all ignorant. And a lot of people are just saying, well, I don't get involved. Well, you're a prime example of that. You're being involved, but you're being shut out, just like the traditional people of this country have this whole time also. Is that right?
Go ahead. Renee, you're up here. Would you like to say hello?
Good morning.
Good morning, dear.
Morning, Renee.
Hey, now I hear you guys. Hey, I'd like to thank Art for the prayer. First and foremost, that was very good. Also, I heard in their prayer for our friends, those that are out there. Like you say, these indigenous people, and they claim they're, indigenous and stuff, so be it. First and foremost, I'd like to include our language in some of these old and historical, what do you want to say, compromises. There was our language. Our language is intact. Then it still is now. Some of that language that's spoken is of settled natural law. It means things. It names places. It tells of how to use medicine, where, when, directions, whether. All those things are defined, and when it's defined as land, when it's defined as sovereignty is what I'm trying to get at. That's in the individual. So I understand what William says when they're trying to teach about the corporate chartered. You know, the corporate chartered what? Individual, the corporate chartered soul, the corporate chartered spirit. What are they? They're a corporate chartered board, a little corporate board. They don't understand. They need to listen to the people. And I understand, Clay, when you mentioned how you believe and how you would like to be recognized and go forth and have your voice be heard. Why? Because who bails out the banks, you know? Who votes in that room? If it's not the people, the citizens of this United States corporation, if it's not y'all voting, you know, who is? So I understand that too. I understand that sovereignty lies with the individual, and first and foremost, our language. Women's rights and stuff. Women's rights belong to the woman. You know, it doesn't belong to those that are defined in the Declaration by the United Nations. Those rights are, you know, they're defined for us. They're not from us telling, you know, from tradition, from language, from existence. Well, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. There's two issues that come up always, and obviously all the deep field auditors have had this happen, and Renee will speak to how these mind sets occur where all of a sudden you have the boss man takes over and says, well, I want to do something that gives me a special privilege above the law of the tribe, the codes and ordinances. Art's experience as well was where he proposed the very things in a very decent framework. It was a code revision to bring back these sovereignty attributes of personality, bring them back in. And basically he got told the boss man have already written the revision of the code, and this public process, so-called public process, tribal process, is a waste of time. So he took his revision, which was 40 pages, and just got rid of it and went back to the boss man thing. So the fruit of evil that came out of that Washoe Game Commission Act, nice little collaborators all on board, you know, go along to get along, was right. It produced this product, this outcome, which is now a tribal chairman who believes he's above the law, and he just goes to the tribal council and solicits the wrongdoing. Renee or Art, do you want to pick this up?
You know, it's kind of amazing how everything that you've said on this show is kind of what I have been telling people. I've warned about the lawyers, I've warned about the politicians, and I've told people that they don't call television programming for nothing. It's mind control, isn't it?
Just like the news, you know, newspapers and locally, like Art said, you know, sometimes we go out to do teachings, we go out to actually speak the language, and some of that settled natural law we have just heard from elders, from those older than us, those that know, you know, go represent, go and say what I would say if I could be there, and go do these things. You're able, you know, and then to be shut out, to be alienated, you know what I mean? Why? Because we're not here to play nice. And we didn't come up to play in the first place. We came up to speak the language. We came up to do a honorable thing for some folks, you know, and we know the system that we're going to face now, but you know, it's something that I think everybody faces when it comes, like Art said, to these political times now. Why? Because the real reasons and stuff like that they throw out there, gun control, immigration, all that, you know, those things go on every day anyway, not just every 4 years. And for politicians, you know, to finally take notice, or finally start talking about it, well, what's Congress been doing about this, and who are those decision makers in? Because that's a lot of people coming in, and I understand the immigrant and the immigration system, you know, like William said, a lot of that stuff is from, you know, foreign economies and stuff, and that's what ours has become within these own states.
Yeah, and also, Renee, I wanted to add in this part. The law arbitrary is construed as the supreme will of the decision makers, collaborators, and franchise beneficiaries, and authenticated as the inner circle. Now that phrase comes directly to heart with us when we first started going out doing these, trying to do our management responsibility like our elders had told us. The inner circle had left us out, had pushed us aside. And so now, today, as we speak, just as the chairman had done with the taking a pay decrease and then turning around and saying, well, if I take a pay decrease, then I'm gonna I want a deer tag and I don't have to apply for it and draw for it. I want it, and the council supported that issue. So the collaborative governance is continuing, and it's continuing to show itself by we can do whatever we want. We don't have to follow the laws.
Yeah, we have our own hunting and fishing commission. Our own hunting and fishing commission was, way back in the 70s, I know, where a lot of our dads, our great uncles, why? Because they were still teaching, what you do, you wash before, how you hunt, they were still teaching in that good way, right? Well, I know that they had sued, I think it was the state of Nevada Fish and Game and stuff, and, they had kind of established themselves as, we are the, kind of the voice in that old natural law stuff. Why? Because we were taking care of the land. We were taking care of the Pinot Hills. Remember, the mosh was included in that. And family wood cutting was respected and taken care of and all that. Now, the fish and game, I always told everybody, is, pretty much a good group of people if they would do what tradition says, not what the corporate charter tells them to do. The tribal council cannot just turn around and say, well, because you're so good and maybe you're a highest of a man that you can, receive a deer tag, and not ask the commission, not ask the people who vote on the commission, or, people who come together and stuff, but just to do that, issue that. And when I first heard this, I thought, wow, and that's a real man in our way. I thought, wow, I said, a real man would go out with his family and camp for a week or two, pineting, like the old mosh, and do it, and take a buck or, a young one for a camp meet and stuff, and bring whatever he had home. I said, that to me sounds right. Not receiving something because you claim to be, or the council appoints and stuff, or that echelon stuff again, William.
Yeah. Okay, and this was regarding the Washoe Tribal Council of Nevada, California. What's the Tribal Council chairman's name?
The one about the deer tag? Neil. Yeah. That Neil. He had given up some money out of his salary to fix the senior center, which of course, sure, that's good. That's great. They obviously can't budget and use some of our general funds for that, which, look at all the signs. A lot of money goes in that general fund, but where does that even go? We don't have a say in none of that.
So the tribal code, and obviously we've been through this and documented, is a model Nevada code, and Nevada, in their judicial manual, you'll see that collaborative governance is codified. In other words, you're enfranchised to be on the team of deciders. And it's important that the treaty covenant is an attribute. It's the cooperate of the creator of the universe, and that is attributes of life. Now, when you look at UCC, NAFTA, CAFTA, in a North American Union, the TPP, which is real popular now in the media, the IMF, the Fed, the American Bar Association, Anti-Defamation League, AIC, UN, HRC, all of these state compacts are not natural law. And the proof is in the many petitions and pleadings, the actions, the causes put in the hands of bar commercial courts and the title courts and the lawyers esquire. Now, these people are lawyers' guilds. They are essentially all types of trade unions, and they're loyal to their trade union. The North Coast auditors have found where the attorneys have looked right at another attorney, a deep field auditor, and said, when they tell us to do wrong, we do it. And so what's happening is this constant displacement, preemption, basically in the situation where the chairman takes over as boss man. This isn't a matter of misunderstanding. This is not a matter of, gee, he's getting special favors. This is a matter of Sherman antitrust and RICO racketeering. and those council persons who voted to support that are co-conspirators before and after the fact. And that's what the discussion needs to go. U.S. justice will hide its pathetic principles and say that the tribes are sovereign, while at the same time they advise legal counsel, no, you're not sovereign, such as Art brought up on in this country, Indian tribes, and these are spoken words by 3 Blackfeet court justices saying all you have is emotional sovereignty, while the revenues get shared. In other words, where this goes on the Nevada situation with the game codes and everything, this means revenue sharing. This means that somebody in the echelon can go in and get a tribal permit to go hunt on tribal land. The same thing applies in Warm Springs Reservation, the coastal tribes. In other words, the collaborating favored beneficiaries, that means politicians and higher echelon, they can go in and get special exemptions to the rule, to the codes. Now, this is not going to go away, and it's not going to be ignored by us, certainly. And sooner or later, someone comes forward and says, well, wait a second, I want to prefer criminal charges. I want to sue them for civil wrongdoing. Go ahead, Art.
Yep, and William, and also what I could say is, let's say 20 years ago, we tried to deal with the same subject of the chairman and the decision makers getting away with crimes and racketeering and corruption. But the whole time we were doing this, every time we would speak up, those that were taking handouts or getting favors done from these agents, leader agents, people would use that against us. So the more that people don't say anything, the more that these people believe they can get away with it. And so these people today that are doing that, such as the current chairman Neil Mortimer and the council members that approved him getting a tag without having to draw for it, they committed a crime, collaboration, and corruption and racketeering. But nobody's going to say anything because everybody's getting handouts. We're under a welfare system, so everybody that is receiving anything from the tribe now is getting benefits. And as long as they don't say anything and they support them, they'll continue to get those little bit of benefit. Which, like Marvin and I, we don't get anything from the tribe. We're always told that we're troublemakers, or we're defiant people, or what is it? What's the word for the domestic?
It's on the fire.
Yeah, it's oppositional defiant disorder, they call it. It is like we go against the grain, and so
I finally got letters behind my name.
The capstone doctrine
William,
mentioned
I'd
before.
like to object because
Renee?
I'd like Art. Oh, yes, I'd like to object right now. Hey, I'm an objector, but I'd like Art to explain back to this man thing. I'd like him to explain the word detumut to you guys, but I'd like him to also consider that before we had what do you want to say? Before we had all that kind of corporate invasion and whatever, the council started butting in and the commission kind of started, I don't know, just doing kind of what they want, more like sport hunting, sport gates and stuff like that. But when Uncle Elwood was alive, remember they even had the Planet Allotment Association. They weren't corporatized or chartered and stuff. After a while, I think they did only when I think the council would give them money. I think when they first started, to kind of help put meetings together, plan, But yeah, and then after that was when Benny, because I remember Benny would be a good one to speak on. It's Benny, and I know my dad and a few of those men still got together because I know they still talk about things, and they say, we need to come back and tell these councils, these young kids, what is going on. And they speak like this, they say this, and just like in the meeting with BLM, those elders stood right up and looked right at those BLM officials, Bureau of Land Management, and said, "Who in the gave you permission to come out on my private sovereign land? Who gave you permission?"
Let me go ahead and answer that. Let me go ahead and answer that for you, Renee.
Yeah, that versus the Kumo, please.
Okay, back in the day when I first started talking here on this radio, the station here, I told about how the gradual encroachment of these ways were upon us, and now what you're talking about is the Tumo to Washoe means speaker, head man, but we had many head men, and they represented different areas of our territory. And so we never had one chief. And that's what we've gone to, a whole different governing system now, where we got a boss man or a chief or a chairman. And this is really obtrusive to the traditional form of government that we had. We had representation from all the families, in a sense.
There are in the fraudulent conversion is quite a real important thing, because it goes to constructive conversion and fraudulent conversion. In this, the people who handle this are the judges and lawyers. And in that, sequestration is really, really important because of the consolidation of individual property to corporate assets. In other words, the tribal government comes in and they not only take the assets, but they take the liberty, they take the sovereignty of the individual man and woman. And this goes to the destruction, the atrocity, again, they call it a faceless atrocity against the community. Now, there's 29 in the identity brief document, there's 29 aspects, legal aspects that are cited on fraudulent conversion. And these deal with a lot of case law and so forth that describe each element and literally in legal terms that proves how the attorneys move, in effect, these collapsing wrongdoing to the higher authority. Now, the environmental movement is a corporate movement. Doesn't matter whether you call it fascism or Marxism or communism, it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing, and that means that law is no longer treated as the collective organization of an individual's right to a lawful defense. It becomes that which is to the advantage of the majority, the prerogatives of the decision makers. Now, all of the governments, state governments, you'll always hear them go, they don't talk about statesmanship anymore. They talk about decision makers, effective decision makers. And these are surrogate powers that are often handed off in the Washoe situation, where you have echelon appointments that outlive the elected officials. In other words, they don't mean anything in the final end. You have a decision team. The boss man's the social ringer. That's the person who appears to be elected. Then you have the attorney advising that, and then you have a cooperative called a social facilitator or a psychologist or sociologist. And that person handles the public narration. The InfraSpec media believability ratings has been tested for a year now. It's published at infraspec.org, and what it does is it goes into a rating system of when people talk. There's criteria, and we certainly didn't invent it. It's criteria that's real. And it tells you whether somebody is pulling a game, applying a game. And this goes into education, where a lot of your change agents are well instructed on how to destroy the speech encoding. And as Renee's brought up, the language is ultimately important. And you'll notice she doesn't go at the end of her sentence with the, a little goose at the end of the sentence. Now, if you go on NPR, PRI, any of these British-led operations, you'll hear, especially feminist narrators, using that little goose at the end of the sentence. And that's a very important thing, because as Renee speaks, she speaks with a rhythm and a code that has got a bell curve to it. And this is like a Masonic handshake, only it's intellectual. So you apply that kind of a syntax, that expression, and then you apply the words. Stimuli. There are 47 phrases used by collaborators that are patterned, and they go to school and learn this, but they're not going to admit to it.
Now we've got we've got a couple of callers up here. They may be just listening. They're from the 605 area code. So if you're a auditor and you want to come on, you've got something to add to this conversation, you need to hit 1 and let me know that you are an auditor. If you do that, I'll bring you into the conversation. Until then, I'll just assume you're just listening. And let me ask you here, what I kind of brought this up earlier. What can we do? I mean, you go up against these lawyers, and the politicians, I think they've been sold out. Now, I point the finger a lot at the state of Israel, or at the Jewish tribe, which has controls our banking, controls our media, controls our movies, controls our newscasters. But it was the British that established this whole criminal state of Israel, and with the Balfour Declaration, they had no right to give away a country like Palestine. They had no right to do that, and they did it anyway. So who is behind this whole Jew world order or New World Order? Is it the British, or is it the Israelis pretending to be the descendants of the Israelites, the people that walked with Jesus in that area of the world? Where's this? Where do we point the finger at? Where do we draw the line at?
Well,
William,
the problem is not in where you point the finger. The problem is in pointing the finger, and that's part of the dialectic. First of all, there's a lot of confusion as to who, what, why is going on. That group, this group. There's certainly sinister forces, and they can appear in any entity. But the real competing jihads are these. Excuse me. You can have a educational jihad. You have, which is represented by institutional normative rationale. In other words, you're enfranchised and you get a degree. You have a legal jihad.
Plank. That is the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto: control of education.
Well, this flip-flops. You can be. You have to understand that the people that you can change identity. Certainly, the intelligence operatives understand this. They'll go in and cloak themselves in different ideas, such as ISIS and so forth, and they create a new label, and all of the consumers run to that to protect their stuff, and they attack that, and then they bomb the towel heads while they're advocating, the outcry of 10. I'll give you an example to that. You have genocide. You have limited genocide. You have people, 6-8 people get killed here. Who knows what's behind it? Could be MK Ultra. It could be anything, or just the person forthright. But then you have, at the same instance, a hospital gets blown up with all the patients and doctors, and Doctors Without Borders get killed, and they say, well, they were embedded with terrorists and extremists, so killing all of them was done on purpose, and the collateral damage is set aside. So you're dealing with psychopaths and sociopaths. Now, the same thing applies in Indian country. when you go in and you tell all the women, well, you don't have enough money, you need to sterilize yourself. It's the same kind of operation. It's depopulation. You're getting rid of the undesirables. Now, the next jihad, certainly the bar jihad, the lawyer jihad, they want that to be, in control, which they are. And then you have the religious jihad, which is could be satanic, it could be Christian, but nevertheless, they're all cults. You look up the word cult and you get the proper definitions. And the two religions that you're not supposed to ever charge with being a cult are Judeo and Christian. You're not supposed to ever talk to that as being cults because you can be prosecuted. Now, the other one, so you get into the sociologists and the humanism movement, and the humanist planks are not principles, they're prerogatives. And basically, the proponents of that movement have said, we are religious too, we're satanic. So you have all of these groups, and in comes the handlers, and they let them play out different scenarios and conflicts under the various techniques, and it works every time. And the reason is that, and we've all spoke to this, is that there is values washing or cleansing. So when people end up with not having any values, no convictions, and then they look to the economy or the market-driven standard to be the solution. And that's why all of these surrogate institutions deal with jobs. We got to produce jobs. And they never ask what kind of job. Now, it's clear in Lakota country, they went and said, well, we're going to get rid of those Sioux. We'll get rid of the males easy because we're going to give them jobs. We're going to give them jobs, all right, blue-collar, low-level jobs. And those who were collaborators or chosen to be collaborators went to the colleges and the universities and were taken care of. Back to language, though. No question about it that there is a rhythm in indigenous languages, and there is an aspect of less deception. In the believability rating system, you have deception not only in the formation of the language, A to Z, the omission of certain words. And the UN is very clear on eliminating certain kinds of words. And when you're talking to people that are collaborators, there's certain words they will never use, but there's always words that they will use. And these are codified words.
Codified. Give me an example of that.
Innovative international law. What does that mean? What is innovative international law?
Innovative?
Innovative national law. What is the lawful definition of equal rights? What page in Black's Law Dictionary is there a definition for equal rights?
Don't believe there is one.
There isn't. Sovereignty, meaning autonomy, actuality, is independence. Independence is being abrogated, and interdependence is being pushed. So what you're getting into these various words like world's vision, global justice, a whole bunch of words that we've listed in the brief will take you right to several words that are used by collaborators. And if you use those words in a meeting, you will be approached and everything will be hokey-dokey for you. If you do not use those words, you will be alienated with prejudice.
I've certainly experienced that. Almost every meeting of patriotic groups, the Truth Seekers in Austin, the Breakfast Club and Saturday Morning Breakfast Club in Tucson, I've been almost shouted down. I mean, people would stand up and try to put me down for no matter what I said. I didn't have to say anything, just entering the room almost. I guess my my reputation precedes me.
It's very important that, as Art brought up, oppositional defiance disorder, and that evolved from various UN level HRC documents and manuals. And basically, what we're seeing, it's becoming more and more prevalent, more hardwired, more and more. You disagree, you're a dissenter, you're dissatisfied, you're a troublemaker, and it starts with a process of these words. One, difference is treated as dispute. Dispute is treated as a consensus blocking. And what you're getting out of these groups, especially in the local area, is constantly looking at a behavioral conformity model. Attachment 3, the identity brief, goes into great detail to show how this works at the community level, because we know that every individual is sovereign, and we have to regard that difference. But what we see in public figures, once they adopt either voluntarily appointed or employed or elected, they're no longer a sovereign person. They're a person of the state. And that applies to bar lawyers. They're admitted to practice. Now, this is very, very prominent and very exemplified by bar lawyers who pretend to represent Indians, because they are admitted to practice according to state laws or a federal bar standard. We've looked at the judges, the Indian judges' ethical canons. We've looked at the bar canons. We've got a 40-page document that people can read and understand when a lawyer is doing right or wrong. And that was based off their model standards. And what we find ultimately in every case where a traditional person is advocating, a lawyer will come in and disenfranchise them. In the Washoe situation, 2 Mormon lawyers came in and suspended Benny Mills because he got into the fact of law and basically defeated the 2 judges, and they only had one other option that they played, and that was to suspend him, get rid of him, and they did it. And that's now a case history. So what we're going to do with that as we proceed this year, we're going to precisely and particularly focus in on the people who are using deceptive practices, whether it's the boss man, the lawyer, the judge, because we understand that when you don't get your say and you have a lawful prerogative to stand in front of a judge in the community and state your case. Now, what we're seeing happen is we have these, in Indian country, a massive epidemic of plea bargaining. And the lawyers are usually junior lawyers that really are, just coming out of law school, or they're just simply so messed up and dysfunctional that the best they could do is become a public defender. Now, that may be admirable, but that doesn't mean plea bargain everything. And plea bargains are a toxic problem. Plea bargaining. And the reason that court-appointed counsel does this is to look to the financial interest of the state. In other words, we don't want to have any cost here. So you tell your client, the best I'll give them is 2 years and this and that and the other thing. So what you are going to see is a constant increase in prosecution under potentiality prosecution. You were thinking you were going to possibly do that next week. And that's the whole basis of the terrorism dogma.
Well, we're certainly we have the most incarcerated citizens. More American citizens are incarcerated than per capita than any other country in the world. And what happened to the indigenous population of this country was genocide. I mean, they still haven't really totaled up how many Native Americans, indigenous Americans, were murdered, both in North and South America. And I'm of the opinion, I'd like to know whether I'm right or wrong here, that the white population of America and Europe is basically under attack now. This is a form of genocide, in my opinion. Am I right or wrong here, William?
Well, I'll just say this, that Indian News Today and Indian newspapers like that prohibit the use of the word genocide anymore. Renee or Art can pick this up.
I think Art's dropped off.
Okay.
I can bring him back if you want. Renee, are you still with us?
I think he had an appointment. Renee, are you there? Okay. So basically, people are following in the Calvary movement, follow a doctrine called positivism. That means you disregard the dark side. In other words, if an individual is being harmed, such as if you blow up a wedding party to get one alleged possible terrorist or a leader that's going against his anti-U.S. policy, foreign policy, you blow up the whole wedding party. And that's the kind of thing that limited genocide is built of. On your comment on Israel, it's not Israel, it's Israel, and it's international. It is a dogma and doctrine. The words get thrown around to the point where you do exactly what the bad guys want people to do, the bad lawyers, and that is follow prosecution by status. So you have to name them. Pretty soon, well, we have to round up all the rednecks. Then we're going to have to round up all those Republican Texans. Then we're going to have to do this. And they prey on that because once they can get you to understand, understand is not to know. Understand is to form an opinion based on an understanding. In other words, pre-decisional criteria. That's what's going on in the media. And you watch the framers, the debate framers, whether it's environmental, civil rights, economy, they always make sure that the debate is framed on particular issues, such as class status, because that is the underlying basis of the so-called hate bias crimes. It mutated from hate to bias. And once you're in bias, then you can talk status, and then you can prosecute people for not liking immigrants. Well, they're not immigrants. There's millions of people who did a felony trespass across a sovereign boundary. And the left wing, which is very careful about weaponized immigration, saw a great opportunity here. So a lot of people came across the border. So you need to look at what was their religious affiliation, congregational membership, what was their political membership, what's economic status, and all of those things. And that's called status differentials. And you go in and look at it, and you will see that it was weaponized immigration. It did not happen by accident. And it was brought on under various superficial ideas. One was immigration rights, the immigration party. All of this stuff is globalist. It's all to create a intermixing kind of a new category of people. And it is the basis of every insurgence in every conflict on the globe in history. Always in comes the insurgents. Pretty soon you have the uniperson. You don't have sovereign, integrous people with a culture, and it's all done like, you have the Equality Act, which is right out there in front now, and it's fulfilling all of the things we pointed out in the intrusions manual on weaponized immigration, screening point things, and so forth. So you're looking at a process. Now, we've said this for 15 years, and the talking heads that are prominent, who have the ear of the market, the media market, they get to speak to these things, but also they get to never use certain words. One word that you will not find with the exception of us and a few, is collaborative governance. Are we just dreaming this up, or is it codified? And it's been codified a long time. I can tell you which states led the way on codifying collaborative governance. It is a change from the Republican form of government to an authoritarian government, the boss man team. And to get there, you have to be accredited, you have to be certified, you have to be licensed, you have to be degreed, you have to have fraternal relations, and you have to be authenticated if you're going to speak to global issues by the UN forum, permanent forum. Now, can we prove this? Of course we can. But the people who do not want to hear these words will just look at it as, oh, they're troublemakers, they're dissenters, they have authority problems. The only authority problem we have is the corrupt authority problem. And that means that you get into situations like the Washoe tribal chairman saying, well, you know, I'm the chairman and I should get a special license. I'm the boss man. And then he certainly will back up against some delusion that he's for tradition, that the tribal chief should get a special privilege. That's not true. The Washoe tribe has made its collaborative governance agreements. Its officials, and especially its corporate officials, its attorney, don't go by Washoe standards unless it's conforming to Nevada, California. That is a bar lawyer duty and loyalty. Obey the state laws. So once again, here we are back to virtues. What are the virtues? Well, if you talk to a lawyer about virtues, you're going to get nowhere. If you talk to him about attributes of life, you're going to get nowhere. If you talk about law arbitrary and what can we negotiate, then you're talking to a collaborative attorney. And collaborative attorneys negotiate. Now, it's interesting that collaboration goes to collusion. And it goes into making sure that the inner deciders, the inner team, the inner participants, planned participation in the courtroom are heard and nobody else is. So your problem is identified. We've identified it. Now, what we're doing is we're looking at remedies, because we're not going to get anywhere with collaborators, because I assure you they think like any other jihad. They are willing to throw themselves on the sword for their global cause. That's it. And they're worse than that. They're willing to throw innocent men, women, and children into that. And that's it. That's where we're at. And as Art said, there seems to be a lack of courage. And whether that's a toxic outcome, whether it's a wide array of vaccines and inoculations, it's all of it.
That had the vaccinations, I mean, since started in childhood, have to affect our mental abilities, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You're looking at literally a Dalton dot kind of a personality that comes out of the norm. And I'm including the colleges and universities, because a lot of time is put into a new kind of conversation, a new kind of dialogue. And when you look at the pre-decisional criteria for education, and you look at our education first scenario approach, you'll see all of the different kinds of educational models, including deception, including depredation of the mind, including behavior conformity, values washing. These are all elements in education today, and it was well protracted and well designed. So we merely took all of those models and we put it into a table, and people can literally go to their school, their educational forum, and just start marking an X or a checkpoint on each element, and they'll actually know which one they're under when they come out of it. They'll know what kind of thing's going on, regardless of the speech encoding, hype, the spin that the facilitators, initiators, and handlers called change agents, which come out of literally a doctrine that's written on change agentry. So the sovereignty issue, most people have no idea that once they volunteer for an NGO, a non-government or 501c3, once they do that, they're no longer a sovereign. They're a person of the state. And they will act accordingly or they will get outed. That doesn't matter. ACLU, process ideology, as an example.
Where do we go from here? We've got so many illegals in this country, and they're responsible for thousands of murders, not to mention rapes and robbery here. The whole Muslim thing, since Obama got in, we've got that happening too, don't we? So,
well,
what do we do? Where do we go from here? What do we do? What are we looking for here?
Well, whatever other people do is going to be their issue, their business. We know what InfoSpec's going to do, and we're going to keep on track and keep precisely going after what we know are the root causes: structured conflict, controlled opposition, abstract confusion, send in our experts. These are the kinds of things that are how the problem is created. The results, the impacts caused on the environment were protracted. They didn't happen by mistake. There's natural occurrences, there are extinction level events. In your country, nobody's going to be able to really push the drought thing too much in the Northwest. It's not going to work like they think. Now, I'll give you an example. Early in 2015, the agency, COE, Corps of Engineers, in cooperation with the various state and federal agencies, emptied the reservoirs. Now, they emptied them. They emptied the reservoirs. Why did they do that? Down to river flow. We call it the liar's line. You build a dam and you put the liar's line up at the top, 200 feet, and you create a great big reservoir. And you say the reservoir is full. Now, when the reservoir drops down, you call that a shortage of water. And the reservoirs are wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. So in the case here, they blamed it on the salmon. They trucked salmon over the dams, which never existed there before anyway. But they went through a lot of gyrations, scientific perjury, and what was the purposes. Well, right now, the Forest Service, BLM, the state of Oregon, they all have to come up with a success story. They need a success story. And the dams can coexist with fish. So that's going to be their success story. They got to build data, field perjury stuff to make that all smell good to the public. And the public doesn't even know the difference between a native fish and an indigenous fish or a wild fish. If it's not marked, it's a wild fish. And it goes on. So what we're going to be looking at is we're going back in and look at the environmental movement's perjury, scientific perjury. So we're going to focus in on our various criterias about perjuries. And we'll find the same people causing the perjury no matter what, with a media narrator partnership and so forth. So we're going to push out there the media believability rating so people can start to comprehend when somebody's lying to them. The liar's line is real simple. If the river is down at the bottom of the reservoir and it's running like it did before there was a reservoir, is that natural or is it man-caused? And come on, let's get off the global climate change hype. You have extinction level events all over the globe all the time. And I've said this many times to environmentalist advocates. Name the tax that's saving the world. And then how you measured that and what was the actual proof of evidence. They can't do it. But they want that tax and they want depopulation. In every scenario we've looked at, overpopulation is about concentrations of population. Absolutely. So the depopulation people really are targeting who they want depopulated. I put out a facetious contract. It was a walk your talk self-termination contract. And in the contract it said, I believe in global warmings and overpopulations killing everybody on the planet, and I'm so dedicated to this that I'm willing to sell my right to life. And I accept $50,000, and then I will be terminated by an agent in 1 year. And you know what I got back for an answer? Well, I don't want to die. I want the other guy to die. Isn't that really what's going on here?
I've suggested that we make abortion retroactive, but nobody seemed to support me on that either.
Well, we can put humor into this. You know, the pro-choice, pro-abortion pro-abortion personality is it's self-eliminating. The people who don't want people on the planet anymore, if they don't have any kids, are going to eliminate themselves. Self-eliminating.
Now,
But what the offset is the sperm banks, and this goes to the DNA gene matrix. Who selects the sperm to put in the woman to manage that population aspect, that gene aspect? Who's doing that? You're in the deep into the eugenics movement. You're looking at vaccines, inoculations that are being given to women. It's beyond just, you know, gee, we're going to give you this because you're getting cancer or something. These are all smokescreen, superficial issues where you have other underlying purposes, common purposes that are in play.
You
and
know,
that's all documented.
one of the my platforms, or one of the things that I advocate and discuss, and it seems like every time I advocate something or discuss it, somebody's out there trying to pass a law against it. And one of the things that I've suggested is sort of returning to the indigenous existence, teepees, yurts, you know, and the basis of every civilization is the self-sufficient family farm. I've told people they're trying to eliminate that. That's the first thing that they go after. This story just came. Yes, sir. Go ahead. What?
What you're talking about is rule, and the dogman doctrine of collectivists is in these words: human capital transport to optimal consumption pathways. We call it metroplexing. And what they do is stack and pack. Now, in Eugenia, Oregon, Seattle, all of these different places, they're stacking and packing as high as they can. The real estate motive is that you can get more money out of that square base foot. You just get more money. You stack people in higher and higher. And then you depopulate the rural zone. It's called rural cleansing, and the sequestration comes in, like in the Montana, South Dakota, all Indian country, where they remove the people that are rural Indian people. They get rid of their lifestyle. They get rid of that footprint, that impact footprint, and they move them over here to HUD housing. And they tell them, oh yeah, you're going to be taken care of in HUD housing. No, they're not. They're going to be tenants, and they can be evicted for saying the wrong political things under the doctrines.
Well, this story just...
the Equity Act applies. So you get conformity. You get rid of the rural people. The dynamic is very simple then. You don't have integrous communities that can survive an event. You have everybody stacked into an overcrowded city, wherein you then can legislate inclusionary, harder and harder restrictions on them, environmental,
that's
economic,
exactly the
political.
story that I was going to share with people. You kind of scooped me on it. Across
Well,
the U.S.,
we call it,
local zoning officials
Nimrod.
local zoning officials are making it increasingly difficult for people to go off the grid. In some instances, threatening people with jail time for collecting rainwater or not hooking into local utilities. As zoning laws have increasingly targeted off-grid lifestyle, many have moved to the southwestern U.S. as an escape from overzealous zoning officials. In Castillo,
there's aspects to this.
in Castillo,
One aspect is this.
go ahead.
It's called inclusionary rezoning, and it's social, political, and space and marketeering and so forth. But what people miss in that discussion is this. That very law they're proposing is a contradiction to national security. When you look at the principles of national security, you'll see that destroying all of these satellite communities and these smaller communities is directly against the national security.
And
no matter whether you call it an emergency or serial warfare or the big bomb threat and all that, because you're looking at a purpose that has nothing to do with national security in terms of inclusionary rezone. Efficiency is a nice word. Eichmann loved the efficient way he burned the Jews. He did it efficiently. So you've got a word in there that, like most collectivist sophistry, is really well tuned to have several meanings or no meaning at all. Like innovative in an international law. Innovative.
well, let me give some examples of this here. In Castillo County, Colorado, there's been a major influx of off-grid residents from the San Luis Valley. The combination of lax zoning regulations, cheap property, and an already thriving community of self-reliant off-grid homesteaders has led to many new residents. The off-grid lifestyle, enjoyed by an estimated 800 people, is now being threatened as county officials have recently made moves to essentially regulate and license the lifestyle into oblivion. Tensions boiled over during a county commissioners meeting in San Luis, Colorado, devolving into a shouting match between homesteaders and police. One of the major points of contention is the county's attempt to ban camping on your own property in an effort to force the off-grid homesteaders back into the grid. We are residents who have come to live off the grid. It's all our land. These are harsh economic times. We have nowhere else to go, 20-year resident Paul Skinner said. We've been regulated out of life. Homesteader Robin Rutan told Colorado Public Radio, I came here because I couldn't live by the codes in other regions. The county, which requires residents to have a camping permit to live in an RV, a small house, or other camp-style home, has started to simply refuse the renewal of these permits. This is obviously a major problem for the homesteaders, who often live in such accommodations while building their permanent residence. They started enforcing the changes before they were actually made, resident Chloe Everhart said. Everhart said she performed due diligence prior to buying her land, with one of the most important aspects of the plan being a 90-day camping permit. Without the 90-day permit, camping on residential plots is only allowed for 14 days per every 3 months. But just as Everhart was arriving, the Board of Commissioners instructed the Planning and Zoning Commission to no longer issue camping permits. In spite of her best efforts, Everhart is now an outlaw.
Well, okay, you've got all kinds of things in that diatribe. You have ecological habitat and you have human habitat. And that goes into inclusionary rezoning. and the way planners, economic planners operate. And they're going to operate on economic channeling to provisional beneficiaries. Obviously, they'll bring up issues like, do they have the infrastructure to protect the resources and all that? And that's nearly irrelevant. Because if you move them to the city, certainly you're going to have the outcry of the city people saying, gee, we have too many people. Now, in the course of Indian reservations, and you can see the duplicity in this, you have already stressed economy, you have predatory economy. You have people going to a casino to try to make a living out of a casino. Interesting. So on a reservation, you have this deplorable status, economic, social, spiritual. And then you bring in a bunch of immigrants, so-called immigrants. They're weaponized influx. They're in insurgency. And they come in, and the tribes say, well, you know, they might have some bucks. We don't care if it's drug money or any kind of money, as long as we get it in our coffers. We'll do that, and we'll tax them. We'll tax them. And what they're doing under the Native Nations Rebuilding is they're inventing their new government, collaborative governance, and they're inventing their new tax structure for their own people, or anyone who's authorized to exist on a federal reservation. So they bring them in, and they call it open enrollment. So these body count goes up, and the government gets more money from its subsidies and its federal matching funds and all that stuff. So you still have kind of a corporate state. And the corporate state is made up between the corporation and the agency. The agency pretends to be an agency, and the corporations pretend to be nonprofits. And then they get together and figure out how to filter their profits and make it look good. And that's what's going on. So this mass immigration thing is really a statement as to what failed elsewhere. So when you look at the hardwired inclusionary rezone, you look at the major cities, the major metroplexes, and essentially their sustainability has failed. Now, this is very, very important to comprehend. Derivative speculation, cap and trade, offset, credit, carbon credit tax, all of those things rely on mitigation failure. In other words, you have to have a sustained failure rate to stabilize those businesses, those NGO enterprises. Now, the lawyers are working on this in the University of Oregon very hard with the Public Environmental Law Conference structure. They want the profits and nonprofits, as far as lawyers pertain, to be mixed up. And that means moving funds back and forth between a profit institution and a nonprofit. And you can go from a profit institution and you give money to a nonprofit, but you can't go the other way. You can't take nonprofit assets and go to a profit-making institution. So what the lawyers are inventing right now is not only a team framework of collaborating attorneys to do this, and judges, case law, but they're framing it so they can mix it up. And now what you call this in political dogma and doctrine is corporatism, otherwise DBA fascism. It is not privatized. There's no such thing as a private corporation. And calling it privatized and using the sophistry that you're attacking the private corporation means that auto-judicially you're attacking the private person, the private rights. And immediately the mass of consumers say, by God, you're not taking my private rights. And they're out and they're running and they're protesting and forming organizations and always doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. So there it is. Those are the basic things that we talk about in InfraSpec to educate a community, essentially to get out of the fog, to get out of the stupor. And there's one Indian lawyer in Albuquerque who's published it in writing, and he said, we need to get the Indian people out of their stupor. Why is an Indian lawyer, well-credentialed, well-degreed, saying that? Because it's true. The consumers in America are in the same stupor. They will argue functional specialization, or what is known as aggregate reallocation. By God, I got my rights. By God, I need this. By God, you're taking that from me. And really, as the people exit the metroplexes, it shows one thing. The metroplex is failing. And in comes a bunch of immigrants who go to the cities in the metroplex to look for the new American dream. And what they end up is they go in, they become part of groups and activism, and they embed themselves in the infrastructure of government, and they say, well, we need more welfare for these people. Some of the underlying controversies are like student loans. Who's getting what, and what is the reason you're getting it? Affirmative action and protected group status. When the women in America finally wise up to that, there's going to be a revolt, and it's not going to be a man and woman issue. It's going to be agency and women saying, why does this woman get it when I don't?
All right, we've got a caller. We've got a caller that
go ahead.
Says they'd like to get on from the 804 area code. Hello, who do I have here? 804 area code. Talk to me. Sound like Donald Duck.
Just listening, Clay.
Who is this?
I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. Well, you hit the one there, so it brought you up. I'll let you go.
No.
Thanks.
Okay.
Alright. How do I do that? Okay, sorry about that. Miscommunication here. Just out of curiosity here, you know, I try to remain hopeful. I try to remain positive. You know, we have survived a lot in the past couple of 100 years here, and I think people are waking up with the internet and the communications, this shows like this getting out. What's your prognosis for the future here? You're trying to do something with introspect, and hopefully people will be able to see. I've got your website posted here. People will be able to go there, and do you have a plan that people can put together and work together?
We've got several instruments that we use. We've got probably about 25 audit programs. In other words, a person can actually go in. First thing they have to do is understand what the source of the risk is. Where is that risk coming from? Who's contributing to it, and why are they doing it? Once they understand that, then they can actually make an intelligible choice and say, well, we need to do this to continue their personal welfare as well as that of the community. And we have several, like I say, documents do this, but we also have a continuity of interest. And that gets rid of the controlled opposition and the structured conflicts. Now, conflict is necessary when everybody else has already failed, and it becomes a conflict because somebody has deceived somebody. Something's wrong. And all of the global institutions, all of the big plans, the TPP and all of these, are really just risk management dogma and doctrine under the theory that everything is sustainably managed. And that's not quite true on this planet. And blaming all the humans, lock, stock, and barrel for global warming is a very egregious piece of scientific perjury, because even the IPCC will confess in the back room that it's about a 50-50 thing, and that extinction level events are natural and man-caused, including chemtrails and HARP. And those are patented mechanisms designed to alter and accentuate certain events in the weather. Now, if people can't comprehend that and they think it's conspiracy theory, we also give dissertations to people to understand what conspiracy theory is. In other words, is it a plan? Is it just a allegation of conspiracy? There's not very little conspiracy going on anymore. The collaborators are out of the closet, and they're very careful on how they speak to abstract it in public forums so that they cannot be attacked. They cannot have a resistance to the program. And those are just simple psychology things that kids learn when they go to college and universities. So once we get clarity, we remember this, very important. Consensus reality is not reality. It's not actuality. It is the group gets together, whether they're doing an exorcism in the church or whether they're practicing the precautionary principle at IPC level. They just simply feel that that's what's going on. And that's not good enough. We deal with systems. We deal with integrated systems, so we have to prove them. It's called proof of concept. Mostly that goes to economic stuff, but essentially we really have a tight process of we interview people, they consent, we get an intake affidavit, and then we have a contract process where we say we can help you, here's how, but we're not going to save your life. You got to save that yourself. People are responsible for their own safety. The more they give that to government, the more they will find one day that the drone strike is on them in an ethical trade-off. So we have to understand that this is not about saving the world or anything like that. It's about being decent to our neighbor and having our neighbor being decent to us. Most people are looking for the global solution, and there's a motive to that. If you have a global problem, you have to have a global institution. If you apply institutional normative rationale, you have to collapse sovereignty to the international corporation or institution, as it's called. Now, that's a manual. That's not my opinion. Here's the guys out of Brigham Young saying, and University of Colorado, and on and on and on, saying we have to collapse everything to the global institution because we want diversification or liberalization of trade. And to have that work functionally, we're going to have the same units of measurement, including monetary system. So the pressure's on to make everything the same. Everything has to be the same. That's not true. That is not a maxim of law. That is an industrial process when you're marketing to a wide range of people across the globe. The ISO system is set up, it's International Standards Organization, is set up to unify everything so that you can have a part on this side of the globe can be sold cheaper than the other part on the other side, such as get rid of the labor unions in America because you can have a sweatshop produce the same thing for a nickel. That's what's going on in trade liberalization. And it's very ruthless. It's very ruthless because it's about a 3x minimum profit margin. It doesn't matter with pharmaceuticals through Codex or anything else. You're looking at that the concept that the world all has to be the same. and the environmental standards are collaborative, and they're doing the same things. They're with smoke and mirrors about protecting this and protecting that. So you're looking at getting through the perjury, including the lawyer's perjury, getting through the court process of planned participation, and then you're going to get back to where you can protect an individual, because there is no collective without an individual. That's another mystique that is put out, you know, the greater good for the most and all that. That's very kind of a plank of prerogatives. It could go anywhere. So
all right, we're out of time here, William. I look forward to having you back on in a short time, and I've got your website, infraspect.org. That's up on my website right under this show. This show will be up on YouTube, Free American 69, and Facebook, Free American 69, as well as freeamerican.com. And
okay, thanks very much for your time, Clay.
I appreciate having you on, always, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.